300 years before the birth of Jesus, there was another man sitting in another garden, but it wasn't the Garden of Gethsemane, it was the Iconoclast, the first privatized school of philosophy on record. And unlike Plato's Academy or Aristotle's Lyceum, this was removed from the town square. It was outside of the civic discussions and in nature. It was also egalitarian, where anyone could come and study and learn and think. You had women and foreigners and slaves. Many of the things that get attributed to Jesus for being so revolutionary, again, happened well before him by this man, Epicurus. A man who has been wrongfully demonized for his hedonistic ideas, which were attacks by Stoic philosophers that wanted to rebrand Epicureanism as something that it was not, which is a whole nother conversation. If you want to have me do a video on the difference between Stoicism and Epicureanism, please let me know. People like Epicurus, and before him Democritus, and after him Lucretius, really paved the way for many of the modern arguments for atheism. Many of you will be familiar with these arguments. One of them is Epicurus's Trilemma. In a world not so different than our world today, a world filled with gods, powerful, unpredictable beings that demanded your worship, that threatened your peace and held your very fate in their hands. This man, a philosopher, sitting in his garden, calmly dismantled fear itself, the fear of gods and the fear of death, using little more than reason and logic. And that is why I love Epicurus so much. And so to get started, let's go ahead and quote his trilemma here. Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? An argument so simple that it can almost feel trite, because so many believers throughout the millennia have rolled their eyes at the problem of evil as if that is any kind of a response. But the argument is just as valid and just as powerful today as it was 2,300 years ago, because the characteristics of the gods that are worshipped are the same. And so for today's video, I just wanted to introduce you to this man if you did not know of him. We really only know of him because of 3 main letters that he wrote and Lucretius's On the Nature of Things, a phenomenal book where he is pretty much writing this Latin poem, completely taking all of the ideas and expanding them from Epicurus. But the rest of Epicurus's work has been lost to time. So Epicurus is born in 341. At 18, he moves to Athens to study philosophy. How lucky. Can you imagine being in this place in this time? Influenced by Democritus's atomism, which became foundational to his worldview. He goes on to establish the garden, and he focused on practical philosophy. That's what is so near and dear to my heart. I love all the heady philosophical debates and discussions that can be had, but how can we live a better life? How can we be more happy? Emphasizing ethics over metaphysics. And again, that aimed goal of happiness is where so many people say, hedonism, selfish, especially when contrasted with Jesus' teaching on suffer, deny yourself, lose, be martyred. And so when the Christian world comes about, these hedonistic ideas get completely demonized even further. But it wasn't just about happiness and pleasure. It was about peace. It was about the removal of fear. And I think that is a beautiful and completely worthwhile thing. In terms of some cultural context for you, he lived at a time of great upheaval, politically speaking, and religious domination in Greece. Polytheistic beliefs framed everything in ancient Greece. Every aspect of life, from governance all the way down to your personal daily fulfillment. In terms of his core philosophical beliefs, again, he added on to atomism. The universe is composed of tiny, indivisible parts, atoms, moving in a void, and that natural phenomenon, earthquakes, thunder, tides, result from physical interactions, not divine intervention. So again, this focus on the natural world, which I don't think we can really get into the headspace of how unique that would have been at that time. To take this away from the gods, to see the world as existing just in its own natural form, working out through its own natural laws and nothing more, to remove so much stigma and fear and superstition just simply by having this as a core concept. Amazing. A famous quote from him here is, "Nothing is created out of the void, and nothing is destroyed into it." Kind of sounds to me like what we know now about how energy cannot be created or destroyed, just transferred. And of course, this had implications for religion. It rejected myths that attributed natural events to the whims of the gods. It brought back control. It brought back order. It emphasized understanding nature to free people from fear. Again, why the garden was such a wonderful setting for these conversations. Similar to myself, Epicurus rejected particular God claims, but was open to the idea of something greater. No need to claim it, no need to guess at it, definitely no need to worship it, and for sure no reason to fear it. If there were gods, Epicurus thought they were impersonal. But he went further than that. He had this idea that any gods that could exist would be these tranquil beings, perfectly blissful, who simply were not concerned with the human affairs. Did they even know about us? Were they the ones that created us? If so, they left long ago, and they have nothing to do with what is going on in our world now. And what I like about this, even though, of course, I wouldn't say that this is my belief system, but picturing gods in this way is more of what we would expect of gods. The problem with gods like Yahweh is that if they're so amazing and perfect, why are they so upset and sad and concerned with every little detail about what we think and what we do? If you were a god, would you want this kind of petty existence, monitoring everyone's actions and thoughts so you can know if you should burn them alive or bring them into your kingdom to have them worship you? No, you're elevated. You're so far above that. In the same way that we do not concern ourselves with the ants, true God would not concern themselves with us. And I know that can sound almost completely backwards, because if you come from a Christian background, you have to think that this God cares about you and loves you and is invested in your outcome. And so to think of a God higher than that, more elevated than that, to the point where we're not even on his radar, feels almost like you can justify trying to make Yahweh a God who cares about us, because we were trying to fill gaps when we made religion, trying to get meaning and understanding. And so a personal God can do a lot of that. But again, according to Epicurus, if these gods really existed, think about the nature of a being like that. If a God is truly above our understanding and higher than our ways, why would we be having one that's communicating with us through some ancient prophet and book? I think he was onto something. Again, not saying that these beings existed, just if we had to have the concept of a God, what should and could it really look like? So what is the practical implication of this? Again, freedom from fear. If these gods are up there, if they even exist at all, and they're not concerned with us, and they're not judging us, and they don't have these horrific fates planned for us if we don't do their bidding or worship them correctly, we do not have to be afraid. The fear of divine punishment is what he saw as one of humanity's greatest anxieties. And considering he didn't believe in that kind of a God, he wanted to do everything he could to rid them of that. This aligns so much with even my mission in this channel. I'm not here to destroy religion. If Christianity is working for you and you are not harming yourself or others in the process, I could care less what you believe. But because I know what is at the root of Christianity, because I know what is at the root of these holy books, because I know the byproduct of it, the harm of it, what it causes you to do, what it causes you to think, how it causes you to feel, the fear, anxiety, dread, guilt, shame that it produces. My desire is to help alleviate that for others in the way that it was alleviated for me by waking up and understanding that this God concept, this particular claim, simply isn't true, and that we have good reason to know it's not true. But back to Epicurus. The main thing, if we're talking about core philosophical concepts that he is known for, is the avoidance of pain and the pursuit of pleasure. But it's important that you understand his definition of pleasure before, again, you start thinking too hedonistically. Pleasure is the absence of physical pain and the absence of mental disturbance. So a better word here is the Greek word that was used, ataraxia, a state of tranquility, of inner peace, of freedom from fear. This argument that the fear of God and of death, a second important part of this, were the significant source of unnecessary suffering and anxiety in the world was his main stated purpose. A famous quote from him is, "Death is nothing to us, for when we exist, death is not, and when death exists, we are not." I love this quote so much. One of the big reasons, again, that religion fills these gaps is the death anxiety of humans, which I think stems from just a fear of the unknown more than anything else. And Epicurus is saying, there is no fear. There is no unknown. Death is completely separate from us. What we are, what it means to be us, to be alive, to be conscious, is life. And when that is no more, that is death. And so there is no more. You are not here to fear it. Many people who are deconstructing and deconverting will often wrestle with this concept of, well, if there's no heaven, then what? Eternal nothingness? As if you experience blankness, blackness, darkness, nothingness. There is no experience. That is what Epicurus understood about death and the message he wanted to relay to people to again alleviate that fear of death. And lastly, in terms of his core philosophies here, it was a critique of traditional religion. Greek religion at that time included rituals and sacrifices and fear-based obedience to gods like Zeus or Athena. But Epicurus saw these practices for what they were: manipulative and counterproductive to human happiness. Man, do I love this guy. Let's move on to step 2. I want to clarify more about the Epicurean view on gods. I painted him earlier as agnostic because we see that in some of the writing, although there's other writing where he kind of claims a belief in gods in general, just not personal gods. So I can't give you a definitive answer there on exactly what he thought. We just know he didn't believe in these personal gods. Because to him, if these higher beings existed, they had to be two things. They had to A, be perfect, and B, be immortal. This is why I love his thinking so much, because Christians believe their God is perfect and immortal, but they didn't think it all the way through. This thing was already done 2,300 years ago. The very fact that a God is perfect means it necessitates even the complete indifference to mortals. Intervening in human affairs would imply imperfection in the gods. It would mean that they are lacking something, or that they need something, that they desire something, or that they can be influenced by external factors. All of those things remove perfection. That's why triomni gods don't work, at least not personal ones. His quote on this is, "The gods exist, but they are neither pleased by our virtues nor angered by our vices," one of many times that he is talking about this concept. For the gods to be truly divine, they must too be in a state of total, complete ataraxia, tranquility, free from the concerns of the mortal world. And though none of this is a response of him to Yahweh, it was responses to the gods of his day. Again, Zeus is a main example, which Zeus and Yahweh have a lot more in common than you think, including petty traits, as Epicurus saw them. No real perfect god would be jealous, would show favoritism, would have a need for vengeance or the capacity for wrath. But let's move on and talk a little bit more about the problem of evil. I won't reread to you the Trilemma, but I do want to break a few things down. What Epicurus did with the Trilemma is he explored the underlying assumptions that were made about these gods that could lead to that personal fear of divine wrath and consequence. And so if you go through the lines of that Trilemma, you'll see it address omnipotence, omnibenevolence, and omniscience, the tri-omni god qualities. And so he wasn't just saying, oh, well, then the God is evil, which is where some people do arrive. He was saying, no, then if this God is claimed as such, he cannot exist. It is logically contradicting, thus vanishing fear, unless you redefine God differently. And then you open up to a whole new set of things. But I think one of the reasons this has held on so long is because it fits the Judeo-Christian God so well. And there's three kinds of evil that are pointed out. There is natural evil, moral evil, and pointless suffering. And I think that this breakdown is really important and something that gets skipped so often when we just talk about the problem of evil, or a better term, the problem of suffering. But natural evil is simple. Again, earthquakes, floods, droughts, diseases, famines, etc. Moral evil is like rape, slavery, genocide, and pointless suffering are instances of suffering that appear entirely gratuitous. Child cancer, animals suffering in the forest with no one to see them for some greater good to be accomplished. So the question in response to each of these kinds of evil is, when it comes to natural evil, why would a benevolent God allow it in any universe? There's no apparent moral or redemptive purpose to it. Why a tornado? Isn't it about man's free will? Isn't that where evil comes from? Natural evil is one of the ones that makes the least sense. And yet again, in man's search for meaning, trying to make sense out of these horrific random events that do detract from people's well-being, they made these natural occurrences about the wrath of God. They still do that today. And as for moral moral evil. If you're a benevolent, perfect God who created us, why create us with the ability to do so? The answer is, of course, always free will, which makes no sense at all. And the easiest example is God is protecting the free will of the rapist to go and rape the little girl, but where is he protecting the free will of the girl not to be raped? This is only one of 100 examples about why free will doesn't work. And then I already covered pointless suffering. If it's indeed pointless, if it's indeed gratuitous, if it is indeed to an unnecessary level, it can't even serve a purpose. The deer that gets its head stuck in some branch in the woods where there is no one around to witness this and have some amazing insight into why we need to take better care of nature and it leads to some greater end that justifies the means. No, it just slowly starves to death, suffers, and dies with no meaning. A conscious creature in fear and pain and terror. But I want to move on and talk about the impact on religion and philosophy that Epicurus has had. I think we've already covered a lot more than I was planning to, so we will just be really brief and we'll close out here in just a minute. The ancient Greeks were phenomenal at this in terms of having a lasting impact. Their thinking was just so useful for what would come around again even during the Enlightenment. So when we get to people like Hume, who's essentially regurgitating the Trilemma in his dialogues concerning natural religion, we see this 2,000-year gap between these men and still the same ideas being talked about and discussed. A century later, we still see it being brought up by John Stuart Mill in his 3 essays on religion. You can zoom all the way up to the New Atheist, where Hitchens, who loved to utilize the problem of evil as one of his main arguments against religion, relied heavily on these same concepts. And we just continue to see Epicurus's legacy enhanced when it comes to secular morality, which, yes, is a thing despite all the believers telling me that it is not. We see this described by Epicurus. He has a call to rationality where he encourages the abandonment of fear-based worship and obedience and even morality and ethics to be replaced with a reliance on reason and understanding the world, attributing to the world what is there instead of to a God. A secular call to science, compassion, and human responsibility. That is the problem with these other moral frameworks from some objective source like a God. It removes the human responsibility from it. Oh well, God sacrificed his son for it. I'm sinful anyways, it was in my nature, but God will forgive me. And it becomes more about the redemption process than it does actual ethics and morality. The focus is more on, will I still make it to the afterlife if I've done these things, or what belief do I need to have to ensure that these sins don't burden me in my eternal fate, than it does on what are the sins, what are they really based off, how do we really overcome them, instead of just being told you're some broken creature who's definitely going to do them. No, let's look at the science, let's look at the reasoning behind it, let's understand the root of it, and through compassion and empathy for understanding that we're all in this same boat, let's move forward with the best possible experience for all. And there's critiques there as well, but if you have to err on one side, the personal responsibility that you get from secular morality that is not robbed of you from a God, both causing you to sin in the first place essentially and being the one person that can redeem you for it, I think is a much better philosophy, for lack of a better term. Epicurus has a wonderful quote: "The misfortune of the wise is better than the prosperity of the fool, and it is better to trust in what is under one's own control than to rely on the caprices of fortune or gods." We see such great influence on the natural world being the reality, instead of the explanations of the supernatural realms to help us understand these gaps. Again, I'm quoting Lucretius almost as much because he was so influenced and is where we get so much of the thinking of Epicurus, but Lucretius simply says, when you see the heavens in turmoil, do not think it is a god, but rather the natural workings of the world. This is what Epicurus does for us: reality. Removing the need to add an unnecessary level of complexity on top of already the mysteries that we have about the universe, its origins, how it came into being, if it came into being, etc. Why go a step further and then have to special plead to stop right there at your particular god of choice? No, it's just this, what we can observe, what we can see. Maybe there's more, but it's pointless to guess, especially if that guessing leads to the rituals and sacrifices and superstitions that try to help control or understand or make sense of what these mysterious gods are up to. Lots of similarities and still lots of differences, but the one thing you cannot deny, and the reason that I did this video today, is that Epicurus laid the groundwork for so much of the atheist thinking and atheist argumentation that is used to critique and criticize false religion and the very real harm that it can do. He emphasized reason, naturalistic explanations, and freedom from fear. What an amazing contribution. And we could quote so many more people that he inspired besides just Hume and Mill and Hitchens. We see it with Voltaire. We see it with Thomas Jefferson. We see it on secular humanism. We see it even in the debate space today. We see it with the spiritual but not religious crowd that I think sometimes can take things too far or create their own new dogma, but that's some of the balance that Epicurus brings to the conversation. We see it in the secular ethics of modern mental health, where there's an emphasis on avoiding unnecessary desires and the cultivation of simple pleasures. Again, when you really understand this, that's why the whole hedonistic aspect of Epicureanism is so silly. Ataraxia is the goal here, true peace. That it was his opinion that you had to remove yourself from the God concepts in order to have it, and I think that makes a great deal of sense, because otherwise you are trading peace in this world for the hope of promised peace in the next. It's like a reversed Pascal's wager, essentially. We see his influence in mental health application, in mindfulness and meditation, and so many other good things that emphasize what we as humans are, what we actually need, the things that actually get in the way of those needs, and the correct way of thinking about this whole concept in general to arrive at better conclusions. Not perfection, not ultimate truth, just improvement with an end goal that is very worthwhile. I hope that you enjoyed this. I know it's a little bit different. On my banner of my YouTube channel, it says religion, philosophy, and rationality, and today I think I did a good job in bringing all three to the forefront. With these ideals in mind, it will always be first and foremost for me to critique the claims of false religions to help relieve people of that burden so that they can find better well-being for themselves. But along the way, as much philosophy and psychology and rationality that we can incorporate into these conversations, the better. Thanks again for being here. Let me know your thoughts on this, if you'd like to see more of this, if you were familiar with this man or not, and to what degree, anything that you would like to add or correct me on, I'm all ears. I'll see you Sunday for a new video, and until then, keep thinking. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support, my Iconoclast and Boris GVI, Joe, Kaboga, Perry, Rocket, Sean, and Tom, my humanist heroes, James, Jared, Christy, and Thronus, my atheist advocates, Caleb, David, Drew, Jeff, Jeffrey, Lisa, Paul, Sparky, and Todd, as well as all of my secular scholar patrons. If you believe in the mission of this channel or you just enjoy its content, please consider joining these fine people. Thanks, and have a great day.